Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Phyllis Summers had always been known for her temper, for the way she could go from calm to volcanic in a heartbeat, but nothing, not even her past feuds, her battles with Diane, her war with Sharon, or her countless motherly meltdowns, had prepared Genoa City for what happened the moment she marched into the GCAC lounge and caught sight of Tessa Porter standing far too close to Daniel Romalotti Jr. in a room buzzing with soft conversations, clinking glasses, and the low hum of weekend chatter. Phyllis's heels hit the floor like warning shots, each step sharper and faster than the last, her red hair flaming behind her like a signal that danger had arrived. Daniel turned just in time to see her expression twist into something between betrayal and feral protectiveness, but Tessa, ever gentle and ever unsuspecting, barely had time to register the danger before Phyllis closed in with the unstoppable force of a mother who believed her child was about to wreck his life. And then, the moment that would be replayed, whispered about, gasped over, and dissected in every corner of Genoa City, Phyllis's hand flew across Tessa's face so fast and so violently that the crack of the slap echoed across the room like a gunshot. Conversation stopped. Glasses froze midair. Even the music seemed to jolt as Tessa stumbled a step backward, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and humiliation as she stared at Phyllis like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. But it wasn't the slap that would send shockwaves across town. It wasn't even the unhinged fury in Phyllis's eyes. It was the 3 words she hurled at Tessa, words so hateful, so heartbreakingly final, that they sliced through the air like a blade: stay away forever. Not back off, not leave him alone, not even the usual Phyllis brand snark. These were 3 words dripping with venom, 3 words spoken with the absolute certainty of a woman who believed she had just caught her son slipping back into emotional danger. 3 words meant to sever any possible connection between Daniel and Tessa once and for all. Tessa's lips parted in disbelief, her breath catching as those words sank in, their weight nearly as painful as the sting in her cheek. She had survived childhood trauma, career setbacks, heartbreak, and loss, but the bitterness in Phyllis's voice hit her like something personal, something designed to humiliate and destroy. And as people in the room began to murmur, some horrified, some stunned, some already pulling out their phones, Tessa managed to whisper, "I wasn't doing anything," only to be met with Phyllis stepping forward again, her eyes blazing with a kind of righteousness that only a protective mother could manifest. Daniel, however, was no longer frozen. The slap had ripped him out of whatever confusion or emotional fog he had been drifting through since reconnecting with Tessa, and fury shot through him with enough force to make him physically lunge between the 2 women. "Mom, what the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, the raw anger in his voice shaking the room as much as the smack had. His hands trembled, not from fear but from absolute disbelief that his mother had just struck someone he once loved deeply, someone who had always treated him with tenderness and respect. Phyllis tried to speak, tried to justify, tried to throw blame toward a woman she convinced herself was dangerous for Daniel, but Daniel wasn't having it. For the first time in months, maybe years, he looked at his mother not with weary tolerance, not with guilt, not with the son's instinct to mediate, but with pure, unfiltered rage. "You hit her," he said, his voice dropping into a low, shaking whisper. "You hit her." And Phyllis, suddenly realizing her son wasn't reacting as she had expected, tried to step closer, her face softening as she reached for him. But Daniel backed away so sharply it was like he feared her touch might burn him. "You crossed the line," he said. "And you don't get to tell me who I talk to. Not anymore." The crowd, sensing the unfolding emotional explosion, parted as Daniel turned toward Tessa, his expression shifting again, this time into concern, guilt, and heartbreak. Tessa still held her cheek, the skin reddened from the force of the slap, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry," Daniel said, stepping closer but hesitating, not wanting to overwhelm her. "She had no right." Tessa swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice as she said, "I didn't do anything wrong." And hearing the quiet hurt behind those words, made Daniel's rage snap into something sharper, something that simmered with the potential to fracture his relationship with his mother permanently. Because he knew Tessa was telling the truth. He knew she hadn't been flirting or manipulating or leading him on. They'd simply been talking, catching up, sharing a moment of genuine warmth, and Phyllis, blinded by her own panic and overprotectiveness, had stormed in like a hurricane determined to destroy anything standing in her imagined line of fire. Phyllis, realizing the room was judging her, glaring at her, whispering about her, tried desperately to regain control of the narrative. "She's married," she shouted. "You're vulnerable. She's messing with your head, Daniel, can't you see that?" But Daniel cut her off with a roar that cracked something deep inside him. "You don't get to humiliate people just because you're scared." His voice carried across the GCAC with a force that silenced every whisper and made Phyllis physically flinch. The anger in him wasn't just about Tessa, it was about years of manipulation, years of boundary violations, years of Phyllis pushing too far and then expecting instant forgiveness. And this time, he wasn't willing to pretend everything was fine. The worst part for Phyllis was the look in his eyes, a look she had seen before only once or twice in his childhood, a look that said she had truly wounded him, crossed a line that couldn't be patched up with an apology or tears or excuses. She whispered his name, her voice trembling now, not with anger but with fear, fear of losing her son. But Daniel wasn't ready to hear her. He turned back to Tessa, gently guiding her away from the center of the room, away from the stares and the whispers and the lingering shock. As he led her toward the hallway, a few people stepped aside, casting disapproving looks at Phyllis. And for the first time in a long time, Phyllis felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: shame. The GCAC manager approached, asking if they needed to call security, but Phyllis waved him off, too consumed by her own spiraling emotions to deal with anyone else's concerns. Her heart hammered. Her palms trembled. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the slap, the echo, the gasp from the crowd, Daniel's horrified face, Tessa's wounded eyes. She had acted on impulse, driven by a mother's fear that her son was on the brink of emotional disaster after all the heartbreak, the loss of Heather, the unresolved pain, and the recent chaos. But even she knew that her instincts had led her to commit the one act she always swore she'd never do again: lash out physically in a moment of panic. As Daniel and Tessa disappeared into a private corridor, whispers swept across the room like a spreading fire. Did Phyllis really slap her? Did you hear what she said? 3 words: stay away forever, can you believe that? She's lost it. Daniel looked furious. This is going to blow up. Within minutes, half the guests had already texted someone about the incident, and the fallout was already spreading through the grapevine before Tessa even reached the elevator. In the hallway, Daniel asked again if she was okay, his voice gentler now, painfully tender. Tessa insisted she was fine, though her voice shook. "I've been through worse," she whispered, but the truth was etched across her face. She had not expected Phyllis's wrath, not like this, not publicly, not violently. Daniel felt sick with guilt, sick with anger, sick with the weight of what his mother had just done. "She had no right," he said again, his voice thick as he brushed a thumb lightly near her cheek, careful not to touch the sore skin. "I promise you, I won't let her get away with this." Back in the lounge, Phyllis stood alone, the reality of what she'd done closing in on her like a suffocating fog. She didn't regret protecting her son, she never regretted that, but she regretted the way she'd done it. She regretted letting fear turn into violence. She regretted letting her instincts override her reason. Most of all, she regretted the look on Daniel's face when he realized his mother had crossed a line she could never uncross. And as the GCAC slowly returned to its usual rhythm, as whispers continued to circulate and eyes continued to dart toward her, Phyllis Summers realized that the slap heard around Genoa City wasn't just a moment of impulsive fury, it was the beginning of a war she never meant to start, a fracture in her relationship with her son that might take months, maybe years, to heal. But she also realized something else: Daniel was no longer a boy she could protect with force. He was a man who needed to make his own choices, even if they scared her. And now, because of her own actions, she might have pushed him closer to Tessa than he had been in years. A single slap. 3 shocking words. And an explosion of emotions that would ripple through Genoa City long after the sting faded. The elevator doors shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing Daniel and Tessa inside and leaving the GCAC chaos behind them. But neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful, it hummed with shock, with humiliation, with anger so thick it hung between them like smoke. Tessa stood rigidly, one hand still pressed lightly against her stinging cheek, her breathing uneven, her eyes glossy but refusing to spill tears. Daniel watched her, torn between wanting to pull her into his arms and being terrified he would somehow make the moment heavier than it already was. The lights of the elevator slid across her face, revealing in every flicker just how deeply Phyllis's slap had cut, not only physically, but emotionally, into a place Tessa had fought so hard to keep safe. Finally, she whispered, I don't understand why she thinks I'm the problem. The words trembled out of her, fragile and painfully small. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tightening as guilt surged through him. Because she's terrified, he said softly. And when my mom gets terrified, she goes nuclear. But Tessa shook her head, her voice rising slightly as she replied, terrified of what, Daniel? That we were talking? That I asked how you were coping? That I care enough to check in on an old friend? The elevator dinged as it reached the next floor, but neither moved. Daniel stepped closer, gently lowering her hand so he could see the angry red mark across her cheek. The sight made his stomach twist. She's scared I'm going to fall apart again, he said, his voice quietly aching. But that's not your fault. As the elevator doors opened, Daniel instinctively placed a protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her into the hallway. Tessa let him, though a part of her still trembled with the shock of what had just happened. She looked around, ensuring no one was lurking to stare at her, to whisper about her, to judge her for a moment she had absolutely no control over. I should go home, she murmured, wrapping her arms around herself. Mariah's waiting, and she faltered, not wanting to imagine how her wife would react once she saw her cheek. Daniel's expression darkened with worry. Do you want me to walk you downstairs? Or call her? Or? Tessa shook her head. No, she said gently. I don't want to drag you into something worse. The elevator behind them closed again, its ding echoing down the hall like a punctuation mark. But just as Tessa reached for her car keys, Daniel reached out and lightly touched her arm, stopping her. Hey, he said softly, I'm already dragged in. And none of this is your fault. She held his gaze a moment longer, and something in her softened, the smallest flicker of trust, of relief that someone had been there, that she hadn't faced Phyllis's wrath alone. But before either of them could say more, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. It was Summer. Her heels clacked angrily, her eyes wide and already filled with the kind of dread that meant she had heard everything, or at least heard enough. Daniel, she shouted the moment she caught sight of him. Where is Mom? Her chest heaved, her voice sharp and frantic. Daniel knew that tone, the tone of someone bracing for disaster, but still hoping they'd gotten bad information. Summer's gaze flicked to Tessa, and her breath caught when she saw the red mark on her cheek. Oh my, Tessa, what happened? Tessa looked away, embarrassed. Daniel didn't hesitate. His jaw clenched. Mom hit her. Summer slapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening with pure disbelief. She didn't. She did, Daniel snapped. Right in the middle of the GCAC. Tessa's voice was barely a whisper as she added, in front of everyone. Summer turned slowly, like she couldn't quite process the avalanche of humiliation her mother had just unleashed, not only on Tessa, not only on Daniel, but on all of them. Why would she? What could possibly make her think that was okay? Summer demanded, her voice trembling now with a mix of fury and heartbreak. Daniel let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Because she decided I needed protecting, again, and because she sees danger everywhere except where it actually is. Summer dragged a hand through her hair, pacing. Okay. Okay. No. This can't get worse, she muttered, right as her phone buzzed violently. She looked down. Multiple messages. Notifications piling up. And then she groaned. No. No, no, no. People are already posting about it. Daniel's stomach dropped. Posting? Yeah, Summer said, her voice tight. Mike from the front desk? He recorded it. And it's already on a GC gossip page. Tessa's heart sank. Daniel swore under his breath. The humiliation that had just hit her now threatened to spread across town like wildfire. I need to go home, Tessa repeated, her voice cracking now. Daniel nodded immediately, stepping toward her. I'll walk you out. But Summer grabbed his arm, her eyes blazing. Daniel, wait. Don't leave yet. We need to talk about Mom. If she's melting down again, she's not melting down, Daniel snapped. She's out of control. Tessa lifted her hand gently. It's okay. He can talk to you. I'll be fine. Daniel started to protest, but she offered him a small, exhausted smile, the kind that covered 1,000 cracks. Really? I just need a moment alone. He hesitated again, then finally nodded. Text me when you get home? I will. Tessa turned and walked toward the back exit, her figure small but dignified, her step steady even though her cheek still throbbed. Every step she took away from them felt heavy, as if Phyllis's slap had left not just a mark but a weight she would carry into the night. Once she disappeared outside, Summer turned sharply toward her brother. What exactly happened? Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Mom saw us talking. And she just lost it. She slapped her. And then told her to stay away forever. Summer squeezed her eyes shut, horrified. Oh my God. She actually said that out loud? Loud enough for the whole room to hear, Daniel muttered. Summer groaned again. Now Mom looks out of control, half of GC thinks you're in some forbidden love triangle, and Tessa. God, Tessa's going to be humiliated when Mariah sees her. Daniel stiffened. Which is why we need to go talk to Mom before this gets even more out of hand. Summer nodded reluctantly. Fine. But Daniel? He looked at her. Whatever Mom thinks she was doing, this wasn't protection. This was sabotage. And she knows it. Back in the GCAC lounge, Phyllis hadn't moved. She stood exactly where Daniel and Tessa had left her, shoulders tight, shaking slightly, eyes darting from person to person as whispers snaked around her. She didn't cry. She never cried in public. But her throat felt raw, as if her body was forcing her to swallow emotions too big to contain. The room had already divided into sides, those shaking their heads in disbelief, those whispering gleefully about the scandal, and those pitying her in that distant, judgmental way that only Genoa city elites could manage. Phyllis clenched her fists, trying to reassure herself. I did what I had to. I protected my son. I stopped something dangerous before it started. But every time she repeated those mantras, she saw Daniel's horrified face. She saw Tessa falling back, her hand on her cheek, her eyes wide with stunned hurt. She heard her own voice, stay away forever, and even she knew the words had been cruel. When Daniel and Summer walked back in, the crowd parted slightly as if expecting another explosion. And the moment Phyllis saw Daniel, her breath hitched. Sweetheart, she began. But he stopped her with a single look. One cold. One wounded. One final. Summer stepped between them before Phyllis could lunge into excuses. Mom, she said, her voice steady and sharp, what were you thinking? Phyllis bristled immediately, her defenses snapping back into place like armor. I was thinking my son is vulnerable, and I'm not about to let him get dragged into emotional chaos with a married woman who loves drama.